Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to you all on this webinar titled Fundraising for the Social Sector in India, organized by the India Leaders for Social Sector. And today we have a very special guest with us, and it's Aniket Doegar, co-founder and CEO of Haqdarshak. Next slide, please. So a little about Aniket. Aniket is the CEO and co-founder of Haqdarshak Empowerment Solutions Private Limited, a social impact organization working on easing access to welfare. An alumnus of SRCC, Delhi, Aniket started as a Teach for India fellow in the development sector. Over the last 12 years, he has co-founded nonprofits and various other organizations in this space and has been an Acumen fellow. For the last 6 years, Aniket has led the Haqdarshak team with his passionate drive to create scale-based impact. Aniket was also on the advisory board of Teach for India and is currently on the board of trustees at the YP Foundation. Aniket has been recognized in the Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia 2019 list and was recently awarded the Social Entrepreneur of the Year by Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. Aniket famously also made an appearance on Shark Tank and also was able to secure funding from those sharks. Next slide, please. He will be in conversation with Anu, who's our founder and CEO. And before we actually move on to start the discussion, a very quick slide on the ILSS fundraising program. The ILSS fundraising program is now accepting applications for its sixth cohort. And this cohort is a 3-month online program and is one of its kind program in for social sector organizations and fundraising in India right now. And it's a really hands-on program and would really request everyone to please explore this program as we go ahead. Over to you, Anu and Aniket.
Thank you, Adil, and welcome, Aniket. Delighted to be getting this opportunity to, can you guys hear me? Delighted to be getting this opportunity to speak to you. As you know, ILSS and me in particular have been big fans of the work Haqdarshak does from the moment we met, and I realized what y'all were doing. It's a couple of years back. We've had Aniket come back and speak to our cohorts so many times. Thank you so much, because it's so powerful, the work that you're doing. And it's also a little personal because I knew someone once, BPL card holder, terminal cancer, got detected and discovered that because of the BPL card, I would never have known this, got a first-class treatment in a super specialty, but it was an information thing that just got lucky that I got to know. And cut to now, recently she called me and said I'm cancer-free. So, for the last 5-7 years, she's been getting treatment, and it's just incredible. These are life-changing schemes that are available that people don't know about, including people like us who should know things. I just got lucky. So it's been very personal for me too, the work y'all are doing. But why don't we start by just getting to know you and your journey really quickly into the social impact space, starting from when you were a student at SRCC, and what was some of those early motivations?
Thank you so much, Anu and Adil and the entire team at ILSS. It's always a pleasure and a learning experience to be part of the discussions, and really humbling as well. So I'm originally from Shimla, born and brought up there, studied there, and then, like most middle income families, aspirationally, wanted to get out and study in one of the best colleges. Luckily got into SRCC and studied commerce. Had no interest in commerce. I basically wanted to...
had interest in commerce, I'd be worried. Who can have interest in commerce? I also studied commerce. I think it should be a vocation. Can't be an education.
and especially, as you know, at least in Indian colleges, commerce. At that time, now I hear there are semester systems and a bunch of other things. But at our time, it was all about attendance, and so it was very little interesting conversations in that sense in the classroom. But my interest was economics and policy from day one. So that was a common theme. And I wanted to get on the academic side of policy, economics, a little bit of politics, So I was in my second year when I thought that, I wanted to do a policy course at Harvard or Oxford or Columbia. These were colleges. And as I started talking to people in the ecosystem, some people I knew from school, some people in the ecosystem, I realized that a undergrad college degree wouldn't cut it, as we a lot of us know. So that's where basically my initial interest in the sector. Of course, I wanted to get a hands-on experience of India, because I realized that I don't want to only work on policy in theory. I want to do some action, and I have a huge bias for action, which is also a negative thing that I have in me. So I basically uh, wanted to do something hands-on, and I wanted to at that age also see that I want to experience India. Coming from a privileged family, hadn't really seen poverty firsthand or real India. So that those were some of the motivations, and a big motivator was to build my resume. At 21, I thought next 4 years, let me build my resume. At 25, 26, I'll apply to Harvard, get in, and that was one of the goals. And that's how I first applied to Teach for India. It was when Teach for India came to our college, it was only a 4-month-old fellowship. The first batch had just started, so it was very little to show in terms of numbers or outcomes. But it just fascinated me at that back then that a program which merged the best of the talent and putting them in the classrooms. And my mother and my maternal side have all been teachers. So that was something that I thought that could be really interesting. And that's how the journey started in this space. And I'm sure a lot of you who would have interacted with not only Teach for India fellows, but generally teachers, uh, teaching is a transforming experience. I always say, and at Haqdarshak, and we can come to what we do later, but overall, we've impacted now millions. We've got the opportunity to do that. But I always say two things. One is scale is subjective, right? Because the kind of work at Haqdarshak we do demands scale. I still believe my biggest achievement has been teaching those 75 students in a low income school, out of whom 68 are studying today in college, right? So I think that by far is going to be the biggest achievement. So yeah, that's how my interest and journey kind of started.
As an advisory board member of TFI Delhi, I'm thrilled by what you're saying, and I hope it gets quoted. I'll make sure we quote that in our next TFI thing because it's so powerful and absolutely rightly said. So, Aniket, run the Haqdarshak journey, especially because it's so fascinating how it began and how you pivoted. In fact, a lot of your journey and those interesting pivots are something I would want to sort of delve into in the time I have with you. So, you started Haqdarshak. Run us through those early years.
So I think after Teach for India, basically, I went and worked in different non-profits, and my entire exposure and experience was non-profits, and some policy think tanks. Got to work with some, of course, industry leaders early on, and I was very fortunate that one of my mentors was the Jeet Meechandani, who back then started Gyan Prakash Foundation, one of the non-profits in Pune, along with Mr. Deepak Satwalekar. So I got really lucky, and that's where in the story of my story, I think the value of mentors is huge as a young person. I think that really shapes your experiences, and I got leadership positions very early on. But in 13, 14, around that time, I was seeing, and this was not just during that time, right from my Teach for India teaching days, I was very, like I said, my personality of being very biased towards action. I used to go out in the community, talk to parents, understand what are the challenges coming from low income families, what are they really struggling with. And in those 2 years, in the next 2 years that I worked on the ground across Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Delhi, I realized that information on government schemes is non-existent. Government already has so many benefits, and back then you're talking about an era. Now it looks like an era 10, 12 years back, but no 2G also, right? And I'm coming from a digitally literate background. I had a laptop. I could still figure out internet and search for things, and I could find nothing. And that's what struck me, that if I cannot find anything, how are we expecting people who actually are eligible for these things to find benefits? So the initial idea actually started by setting up a non-profit. It was called Hands for You Foundation, which still exists. We don't do anything in it. But in 2014, I, with a friend of mine, from SRCC, we started a foundation purely with an intent not to really set up an organization for scale, but set up like a Wikipedia platform. Because he was also working in a corporate company. I was doing multiple things, consulting, working. Like again, in that mind, I was building my resume and gaining experience. So I had no intention of building an organization. And the only natural entity that came to my mind because of my experience was setting up a non-profit. And we went about doing some initial research in Delhi about government schemes, information gap, and it basically uh, kind of gave the proof that yes, information gap is massive. People are not aware of it. In a year into it, what we realized two things. One, information gap, solving the information problem is only half the solution. The second thing that people need is handholding in actual assistance. Like, even if today with all the technology you give a low income family access to information, they still need assisted tech. And I always go by what Nandan Nilekani says even today, that India is an assisted tech country. Right? India is not an end-to-end technology country. We need that assisted technology, assisted help, last mile support. And that's what one thing that evolved. The second was in this space, I found it really tough to fundraise. While we are doing a fundraising conversation, it is very important to understand running a non-profit in India is the toughest job by far, because it is like a chicken and egg situation. To get funds, you need ATG, 12A, all the certificates. But to get the certificates, you need work. So unless you have like a mentor, like I said, the power of mentors, supporters, philanthropy, someone believing in you, it is extremely difficult. It's much easier to actually initiate, and at least back then in 2015, it was a lot more easier to set up a for-profit entity because of the Startup India program and the multiple grants and multiple in a way programs or the money that came with it in terms of applying to colleges. So mid 2015 is when we internally decided to pivot to a more for-profit structure, and it was purely because of access to resources. In my mind, or in the in our personal ecosystem mindset, we didn't think that entity structuring would mission wise have any issue. We could have been a not-for-profit, we could have been a trust, society, or a for-profit. The mission and vision articulation was very clear, and till today remains very clear in terms of impact first, technology first. But I think at that time, especially in 2015, we could access resources much more easily if we were registered as a startup. And that's how, and also I think technology in non-profits as an idea is evolving only now, and it has got accelerated with COVID. Pre-COVID, technology and non-profits was not talked in the same breath. And I was one thing, again, learning from my experience, I wanted to do something with technology. I didn't want to kind of only do a program approach.
No, so this is very fascinating because you actually, so I wanted to ask you now, for this is an audience that's largely looking at fundraising, social enterprises, non-profits. If you had to do what you did in those early days today, in this new landscape, would you still register as a private limited, or would you feel like maybe the non-profit, because clearly the non-profit route also has its advantages,
Yeah.
as does the private, the private funding. So what would have changed for you if you had to make that decision today, say 5-7 years later?
I think the kind of ecosystem support with the incubators, with technology, I think the non-profit sector today is much more attractive in terms of for especially young entrepreneurs. I think seasoned entrepreneurs still find multiple ways, but I think I was a first-time entrepreneur at 25, and also, I mean, even if you are at any age, if you're starting first, just the kind of a cushion is required, right? Some kind of backing is required. So I think today that's much more there, but I very openly also feel that I would think twice to still start a non-profit because of the government regulations around non-profits today. I think that's a reality, and I think that's something that everyone needs to think through. People maybe having dual entities or this thing is the way forward for everyone. For-profit entities to have non-profits for the opportunities like you just mentioned, large grants, philanthropy. At the same time, non-profits having a for-profit entity to whichever services-based because there's a lot of services-based scope where you can pay GST and generate revenue as well to be self-sustainable. Because the regulations and the approach, at least in the last 5 to 6 years towards non-profits, hasn't been, has left very little room for making any error or innovation, is what I feel. So I would still think twice about going ahead and setting necessarily a non-profit. But I think today's scenario warrants probably a dual structure for everyone.
So, Anik, yeah, I think so. I think people are trying to get the best out of both situations by going through a sort of hybrid model, in a way, so that they can have access, because access to capital is, like you said, is and the kind of legislation involved just doesn't lend itself to innovation. So. Something needs to shift there. But Aniket, what do you think, for any social enterprise? What is the importance of building capacity? Like if, again, I'm asking you to wear your lens of early stage entrepreneurs 5, 6, 7 years ago would have been really helpful for the Haqdarshak journey in terms of, if there was capacity building support for you, what would that have meant for you? What would you have wished for it to be?
So, like I said, I think a lot of mentorship. I think we undervalue the role of advisors, mentors, programs, guidance. I think a lot of times capacity building is not just about what is the right thing to do. It's sometimes what not to do. And that's what real advice tells you, that, don't do this. And that's the more important thing. Most times as we grow and scale and going forward, the mistakes that I've made at Haqdarshak as an organization we've made, is not knowing when to say no. Because you're a young organization, you want to say yes to everything. And now at certain level of maturity, now we know when to say no. I think that capacity building guidance is crucial. I think, and within the team, I early on again got great guidance, like I said, Daljit, but also which I think in the social sector, everybody's mentor is in a way Vijay Mahajan, and he kind of also took a liking to us and guided us, and he always said that learn to delegate, empower the team, and we were always, and I think that's where, as founders, people who are building organizations or a part of leadership, not just founders, but I believe like even the top leadership of organizations are usually perfectionists in their jobs, is what I've realized. And you have to be okay to be let go a little bit in terms of imperfection. Because if you tend to do everything on your own, that I feel brings down the capacity of the organization. So and this is not, I can say this in hindsight, but I think early on, that's something again I struggled with, that wanted to do everything on my own. How do you build internal capacity in the organization? Even things like we're discussing fundraising, right? Like fundraising for a founder, it's critical that they play the role. I still play that role, but I think the delegation of process is really important. And sometimes you do feel that, oh, if I was there, I would have done it better, but you have to be okay with it, because otherwise scaling is extremely difficult. So yeah, initially we made some of these mistakes, and if I were to, like you asked, hindsight, look at it, capacity on those aspects in early on, that not everything has to be done by you, and there has to be a lot of team building that needs to be done. Because in this sector, especially, unlike manufacturing and others, 80-90% of cost of all organizations in the social sector are people costs. Yes. Whatever you do, any sector. Yes. And if it is 88-90% of your costs are going to be people costs, there has to be a lot of focus on capacity building and kind of your own as a leader as well, to ensure that those people thrive.
Absolutely. In fact, that was something I read from Reid Hoffman on how, when he started LinkedIn and all those, he said, let little fires burn. Yeah. It's okay, because there'll be always many little fires when you're in a startup. You've got to decide which fires to douse and which ones you just let it burn. And I thought, because like most founders, one wants to try and sort of solve for everything, and you don't end up solving for much. So coming back to the way I almost feel like maybe your bias to action led you to pivot into the private sector more, because you could have stayed the path of a nonprofit as maybe others have done, because funding does start coming after 3 years to 3 years, but because you were pivoting, you pivoted to private sector and you got, what was that whole experience of funding? Because fundraising, we run a fundraising program, but what I'm always talking about is that everyone needs to know how to fundraise, not just for a non-profit. You need to fundraise irrespective. It's a skill and it's an art and it's a science. So what was your fundraising journey, even as a private sector, because you were now looking at different ways to get funding for a social impact cause. This was not going to give you like lots of money in terms of money return on investment, but it was a largely a social impact cause. So what was that fundraising journey for you?
I think I would divide the fundraising journey into 3 stages. My first, I would say 2 years, was a lot of personal narrative and idea. And I think they were like and I'm not going necessarily by the structure. We were a for-profit, impact focus. Somebody else could be a not-for-profit. But I feel for us also, it was similar. Early backers who really believed in me as an individual and the idea and the need of it. And I think it's really tough because you get those people after asking 100, you get one. So I did that. I reached out to those 100 people, probably got one or two convinced to say that early. And I think at that stage, it's purely on the merit of, like, they take a punt, as they say, right? Oh, this might work. And the belief that this problem and this solution is important. So that was first stage, which was completely heavy lifting by me as the founder. And it was whatever comes, but it was more about the personal narrative. Why we are doing this? What do we intend to do? Because we had literally nothing to show, right? I mean, at that time, it was all promise. The second stage of, I would say, the fundraising is when you start working a little bit more in terms of processes, in terms of teams, in building and kind of applying to programs, because I think that's where a little bit more structure starts coming in. And you start up, because I think, and it's very important when we are looking at fundraising, to apply to a lot of competitions, a lot of grants. You will face failure, but that structure, that process gives so much learning to the team. Our team and myself have learned so much by applying to so many competitions, and it shows sometimes in our social media. We have won so much. We probably won 8 or 9% of to what we have applied, because we don't share in the sector what we have not got or where we have got rejected. But I mean, initially we got rejected to so many things. Even today, like, I think when we get something, we've applied to 10 and we get accepted in 2, because in the sector, it's in the social sector especially, it's a fit thing. Nobody, I think, really, very few applications get rejected because every problem is important. It's just that the fit for a grant or application or this thing. And the third stage is where we are, I would say, today, which I think for fundraising is person agnostic. So I can go, anybody else can go, but then you need to have 3 things very clearly: your data, your communications, and your stories, individual stories. Because what funders really like and what appeals to them is, okay, one is the data, which is the scale and numbers, depending on what you are doing. Like I already explained, like if you're in education, transforming the lives of 50 children is massive. Whereas in our work, even millions might be small because the kind of work we are doing. And then the communication narrative, I think, what we call in the traditional corporate sector marketing, I think it has huge value in the sector. How we communicate, how we put that narrative out, who we want to appeal to. And there, I think I've learned that we make mistakes when we create generic decks, we create generic narratives. That preparation when you're going to a funder and doing a little bit of tweaking and kind of, customizing it. And then the individual stories. Because the person who you're going for fundraising, they anyways have given you the meeting because they like the idea. But now to really appeal, they would want to know the story of that one person, that how it is changing. That unit economics, what we call in a traditional way, right? Like how does that unit impact in that sense move? So I think that's how it has been, and at every stage, and continues to be very, very challenging. But now I think after a stage for organizations, it has to be the data. That has to be very, very, very clear and crisp in terms of fundraising.
No, but this is this is a powerful lesson for all our participants. You do have to do a lot of the asking in the beginning. There are stages. And I think everyone has to go through these stages. You've got to have those 100 or 1,000 conversations to be able to, turn the needle. You've got to do it. I mean, if somebody has found a way to shortcut this, more power to them. But in reality, you've got to have, be prepared to have a lot of conversations. Let's put it that way. And of course, you'll find those early backers. If you don't have those conversations, you're not going to find them. And of course, importance on building your data, doing research. People walk into funder meetings having not done enough research, and that's very frustrating. We've heard this from the side of the funders that this is a generic ask. We fund X, and people are coming to us with Y, and they haven't even read up on us, and it's so frustrating, and so on. So I think doing research, having your story, putting your data in place, these are really.
I mean, on data, right? One other observation that I've had is that a lot of people who are in fundraising space in the sector, there's a personality trait that I've observed, that people are very spontaneous and people are very great communicators. And I believe that if you have data, that empowers you to think on your feet better. A lot of people who are thorough, while I've realized that a lot of people in fundraising are very spontaneous, and I've also done that in meetings. I'm guilty of doing that, going in and just speaking. But I've realized over the years that if you know your data well, you can actually pivot the conversation towards what you are looking at. If you are not thorough with data, not thorough with what the funder thinks and your own numbers, then it usually, however well your narrative is, it doesn't end well. So I think it actually empowers you in that meeting to think quick on your feet and have quick responses and with the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely valid point. One last question, Adil, before I hand it over to you for the questions that are coming into the chat box. This is really about the social stock exchange. It's about to sort of take shape. What are your thoughts? How do you think it'll help the sector, having a social stock exchange?
I think, again, I'll come back to, I think it's a great way to put projects and ideas up there. I think the idea of social stock exchange is, whatever I've understood and read, is not necessarily that in this space organizations will get listed. It's more about the ideas and projects, which will, I think, lead to, in my mind, great collaboration. Today, a lot of collaboration doesn't happen because of a lack of common funder or sometimes push or ideation. But I think a social stock exchange can lead to a lot of collaboration at scale, collaboration for pilots and innovation as well, because you'll have to list your projects. And how I think it is being designed is that you will have to put all metrics, all data. M&E evaluation is a must have. Like you mentioned, like research on those data points. So because it will be covered and that governance will be there, I think it will be a great opportunity to put up projects for both social enterprises, non-profits, and collaborate. We'll see how it goes. But I think it also hopefully should give a lot of medium to small donors, and I would say in this space, investors who want to invest in impact, an opportunity to invest transparently. A lot of times there are a lot of well-meaning folks who want to invest, and if they either end up only doing the traditional 5-10 large non-profits who have marketed, or they want to fund ideas, but ideas, it's very difficult to get an idea and project to them. So I think it will also, in my mind, and I'm very hopeful that it will increase the pie of philanthropy a lot more, where people with smaller ticket sizes, let's say if I want to invest 5 lakh, 10 lakhs in philanthropy, rather than what we today have traditional routes, we could potentially invest or fund a project on the social stock exchange. And it could be different products, right? Pure philanthropy, it could be a impact bond structure, it could be a debt at 0% that you get your returnable grant, you get your money back. It could be investment or equity in a social enterprise. So it really, in my mind, opens up the whole space. Of course, I also hope that it doesn't create another layer of compliance for non-profits, because I think non-profits is the space which is the most compliance heavy today. So I think how we navigate that, and it is not an additional burden, but I mean, already what organizations are doing, it's just another layer to that, is what I hope that it ends up happening. But like any new thing, maybe next 5 years will be learning years. But if it works, it definitely will. In a country as diverse and big as India, that's the way forward, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, unlocking more philanthropy is always a good idea. So I'm an optimist. So I'm just hoping that, this delivers to what is the expectation. And I really resonate with you. Nonprofit CEOs have the toughest job in the world. They don't have an enabling environment. And It's just hard. Your passion and commitment for what you're doing keeps you going. There is nobody else or nothing else that can do that. So, and also I was thinking, who knows the way Haqdarshak is going, Aniket, Harvard might give you that degree any which ways. I made a note to say that. On that note, thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Adil to take the questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aniket and Anu. I think that was lovely. A very candid discussion that we just saw. I just want to reach out to our attendees today, and we have the Q&A tab. Please use that tab to punch in your questions. I see some questions have already come in. So we'll start with the first one, and this is from Nupur. And the question is that, fundraising as a discipline, people have been fundraising for quite some time, even without capacity building programs. So the question is, what would Haqdarshak's fundraising trajectory would have looked like if there was a program like, say, the ILSS fundraising program?
You know where that is going, Aniket.
I think we would have, like I said, we would have made lesser mistakes. And I think we would have, because sometimes it's just not about the quantum of money, it's also who you take the money from. I think a lot of guidance and structure that Haqdarshak didn't have was that we just went after any money that was coming to us initially, right? Like, we're just fitting in and thinking things through, like, is this a strategic funder? Is this a strategic partner? Should we invest a little bit from our side to get the pilot going, POC going, as they say, and then this could be a long-term thing. I think having a program like ILSS, because the fact is, and the reality is, founders still have a lot of opportunity to zoom in and zoom out because of the opportunities we get in the ecosystem to talk and all. But the second layer of leadership doesn't get it right enough, and the other leaders. So I think a program like ILSS, not only at that time for me, but also for the team especially, would have given a lot of exposure and a lot of kind of learning from other people. And that's the other piece, right? Like, when you learn in an environment with other peers, that's great learning again of, like I said, what not to do.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Aniket. Aniket, we have a very interesting question, and it's so interesting that somebody's posted anonymously, right? And the question is, why do you think fundraising is the new F word, right? Especially in the context of the Indian social sector. In other words, why do you think everybody is daunted by taking up, a fundraising portfolio?
I mean, I think
Maybe he doesn't think it's an F word.
No, I think it is. I mean, if I think if my team would be on this call, they would be absolutely like jumping up right now and saying, yes, it is. I think the fund also, I mean, I think the expectation from this sector, funders, is becoming more and more demanding. While we want to create impact, we also want very tangible outcomes. We want measurable impact. We want things done timely, because it's, I mean, not to put all the onus on funders. The fact is, CSR reporting has become so tight, right? I always say to my team that till October, funders sleep, and suddenly in November they wake up and they want to spend all the money in mid-Feb to March. It is happening. I mean, this is the reality, right? And if the funders are there, they know. And I'm not saying I'm blaming them, but the fact is, this is how our cycle has become. We are running calendar year to calendar year. So I think, because if you're fundraising and you're part of the fundraising team, probably you have the most passion and interest to see the organization survive, right? After the founders, it's the fundraising lead who gets sleepless nights that first is coming, I have to pay salaries. I have to ensure, because it's me who will kind of be the pillar around that. So I think it becomes very, very tricky. And I think that's why it's becoming, in my mind, that dreaded piece, because the targets never end. That's the reality also, right? Like, because it's such a yearly thing, you have a great year and then suddenly you have one bad quarter and you're back to square one. You have to still go after the same funders, new funders, convince them of this thing. And the other thing, just to add, because we are unique as a social sector, we go out for our program funding, right? Compared to commercial sector, we don't go for our salaries. Here we go for funding for our salaries. So the other issue that comes here is that you have to go to the organizations or philanthropists and funders year on year explaining the same thing, and more with competitors. Especially if you look at sectors like education, more and more as the sectors are growing in the last 10 years, you're getting, oh, but this organization is also doing the same. And sometimes you feel like saying, but you will need 100 such organizations to solve for Uttar Pradesh.
I say that all the time. Because we used to say it at Ashoka University when people would say,
Yeah.
oh, but some other liberal, we'd say, well, Ashoka needs 5,000 more Ashokas. We are not,
Yeah.
3,000 students we'll take. We're not covering higher end by any means.
Well, I
So,
mean, Uttar Pradesh population is bigger than Indonesia. You have to think of in that perspective, right? You're solving for Maharashtra, solving for Uttar Pradesh, solving for a Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, is solving for huge countries.
huge
And
country.
all of us in the social sector today, if we all put our energies in one state, it'll still take us a decade to solve problems.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
So thank you,
I
thank
never
you
let
for
anyone
sharing.
get to me on this whole, but others also doing capacity. Like, Acha to hai, are you upset about it? Should we shut shop? Is there too much welfare happening?
Sure. So we move on to our next question, and this is from Vishwanath. And Vishwanath has essentially questions about Haqdarshak. Curious to know how Haqdarshak has been able to charge a fee from the most vulnerable populations, right? Number two, are these fees fixed or they're dependent on disbursement, as in a percentage of the amount of disbursed? And also, what has been your execution challenges in the last 5 years of your operations?
so interestingly, in our program, corporates pay our fee. What we charge the citizens is the government fee, because I went to a couple of senior IS officers right in the PMO to CMOs. And the response I got is government doesn't do anything for free. If you actually go on the ground and go to government centers in any state, even a printout is charged. Caste certificates cost in India officially ranges from 250 rupees to 500 rupees. There are, of course, certain government schemes which are free, but let's say if an Aadhaar is free, Aadhaar printing and lamination costs 200 rupees. So the concept in government is that these government services are also a way of livelihood generation. So citizens are actually very happy to pay. What we don't realize is that citizens are never averse of course, you have the absolute 2-3%, 5% destitute who nobody charges, including
Right.
Haqdarshak, or I think nobody will charge.
Sure.
But remaining that 5 to 35% bracket, right, or 5 to 40%, they are happy to pay if you give them transparent quality service. It can be anything.
Right.
And we have seen that in private education, private healthcare, all of these being the job of the government in a way. Or even if you have livelihood courses or job skilling, job matching, anything that you see in this target audience, what they are not happy with is people coming back, making promises and not delivering. That's what they're and starting
Right.
from the politicians and party workers to the sector itself. I think over the years, that's what their problem has been. Whenever we have gone back to this, and the reason why we've been able to sustain for 5 years is because we hire from the community, our Haqdarshaks are from the community. And the logic there is that Haqdarshak is not going anywhere, right? So she has to deliver.
Right.
It's her neighborhood.
Right.
And like I said, nominal fee charging, we've got actually very positive response on that.
Mhm.
There's no moral conflict.
Right. Sure. We move on to our next question, and this is a very interesting question. As an early stage entrepreneur, what are the few areas we should focus on towards building a compliant, sustainable organization with respect to accessing funds from diverse donors?
No, so I think one of the first team hirings, part of my first 10 team members that I initially hired, they were an HR team lead, a finance person, and an external legal consultant. I think if as a founder you are going through contracts and doing all of that, I think it's a waste of time. Outsource. I'm not even saying hire necessarily,
Right.
depending on your organization. But there are enough now outsource platforms where you can outsource CFO things, HR things, legal things, but spending your cost and budgeting for that is crucial. If you think that setting up an organization, you can do everything, it's just going to take away a lot of time
Sure.
and energy, and you might end up not being compliant. And especially like from our perspective, I mean, it's true on a governance compliance perspective for non-profits, filing of so many things. For a for-profit, it becomes taxation. We have
Right.
to file for so many taxes on a monthly basis. GST has to be filed, all those things. So you need to, especially early on, invest in those systems and processes. And like I said, as and when you can hire, fantastic. Otherwise, there are very reasonable offerings. It just has to be part of the plan and let the experts handle it. Compliance is absolutely
Sure.
necessary. Uh, every time we've got audited, and not just for investment, but generally by a partner or this thing, we've always found shortcomings, something or the other. In India, you can never be 100% compliant. You can
Sure.
pick the blue chip company from the stock exchange, they won't be 100% compliant. It is very difficult to be 100% compliant in India. But every time we learn. And the other thing to that, to being governance, is be open to audits. When I say audits, is being open to third party, your partner saying we want to do this, because there
Right.
should be nothing to hide in that sense, right? Today, I
Sure.
mean, I can pay 500 rupees and get access to any financial data information on any organization, anyways. So, some of those practices help.
Right.
Adil, I want to jump in and ask a
Sure.
question. Aniket, what is the role of your board? Uh, you must have a board, right? That
Yeah.
probably guides you. And what has that genesis of that been? Has your board helped you in fundraising? Has there been any guidance there? Because they say board members can help you with raising funds or opening doors. So, what has your experience been with your board?
So my first board member, or kind of in a way even co-founder, was PR Ganapati Guns, who
Oh, of
was
course.
ex-Wilgrow. And I
Yes,
think
yes.
first 3-4 years when he was very closely involved in the board, he helped me with connects and fundraising. Apart from, so I think the role of a board also changes. Now the kind of board we have is very governance driven. Like, processes helps. We take a lot of help in guidance in hiring, structuring, planning, our review of our budget spends. Very little on, I mean, of course, all our board members and even advisors, or generally in the ecosystem, give us connects wherever, anybody who thinks that this is relevant, which I think this is one sector which everyone does this, I feel, for everyone. If you do feel that, somewhere you can connect the other person, this is one sector which will always do it. But other than that, now our board is more of like a governance board and it is more in terms of reporting on a quarterly basis and being on track and getting pulled up as and when we haven't done some of those things. But fundraising, first 3-4 years, it was a lot about getting connections and uh, gap funding and things like that.
Sure. Thanks for sharing that, Aniket. Aniket, I'm going to club a few questions together that are, of similar theme. And the question is really about challenges that, Haqdarshak has faced. I'm also going to club that with a question, which is, what are the general challenges for organizations operating in the rural space with regards to fundraising?
So I think in the rural space, the challenge is geography. If you look at the CSR spend, Pune gets about 30% of all CSR spending, Pune district. Maharashtra gets 50-60% of the funding. Then, you have spaces, North Rajasthan, Karnataka. The actual aspirational districts get very little funding. So the challenge is not so much rural, but in India, the challenge is the skewed geographical push. So even if as a program, you'll say, I want to work in Eastern UP or Bihar or tribal districts or Northeast, you will get some great seed money to do it, because there are philanthropies today and risk takers who will give you that initial seed money. To get regular program money is extremely difficult. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs will attest to that if you have a great idea, I want to do it in Mizoram tomorrow, I'll have some philanthropy raise up their hand and say, yes, let's do it. 1 year down the line, when it comes to 5-year program funding, there's no one. There's no industry there. Nobody wants to back it. No CSR wants to take a risk. Or let's say Jammu Kashmir for that matter. Let's say, all these states. So our rural problem is the skewed geography. We need more and more conversations with entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs come from small towns and cities, right? And they are coming up even more. And the other problem is the fundraising talent we are getting is from larger metros. If
Right.
we get fundraising talent from Indore, from Jaipur, from Visakhapatnam, from
Right.
Bhubaneswar, chances are they will tap into local industry. Our
Sure.
fundraising talent is also in Mumbai, Delhi, Pune, Bangalore, which is true for Haqdarshak. That's the challenge we face today. 90% of our fundraising team is in these 4 cities. We haven't tapped into the other cities I mentioned at all. So, I mean, sharing very openly, that's the challenge we face as we speak today.
Right.
And that also I feel is a sector issue. And that's why we are very grassroots organizations. And when they are told that you can't scale, is because nobody's funding them for 10-year programs to scale.
Right. Sure. Thanks for sharing that, Aniket. One more question. Now, as we speak of funds, one of the biggest sources of funding is CSR, and everyone's vying for that. So the question is from Jonathan, and he wants to know, as a private limited, are there any projects you have been able to get CSR funding for, or via a service contract with a participating NGO?
Yeah, so all our work technically is service contract, because as a for-profit, we can't tap into direct CSR funding. I think initially it was extremely tough.
Right.
Because we also had a lot of bias against us, saying that you're a for-profit even if your work is good. But I think as numbers and outcomes have, and our cost has shown, we actually now have companies reaching out to us and saying that we can figure out a way. Whether it's, like you said, through their foundations or CSR, NGO partners or other platforms, we are able to get it. And under the law, you can get a service contract for doing a service. So we have partners, but we also have a program where we work with 80 plus non-profits. So we do realize that the only way to collaborate and not say that I want all the money is to say, let's have a non-profit get empowered. Right? Because that's how you will scale. I mean, large part of our scale has happened because we have said to a funder that instead of giving us money, give us 10% of the money, give 90% to a grassroots nonprofit, so that we ensure that their people are trained on our technology. That way, it's a win-win. Because, I mean, at scale, we don't want to create a parallel government structure by hiring so many people as well.
Right.
So that has worked for us in conversations with CSR.
So Aniket, really, why don't you just run us through your revenue models? Because your one model is, of course, getting, in partnership through corporates, in partnership with NGOs. The other is working with corporates on their sort of their pet areas, to put it lightly. So how are they, and then there might be individual people that your Haqdarshak officers reach out to. How does that work?
So today about 90% of our revenue comes B2B, which is essentially either corporates or foundations or CSR or non-profits or governments who want either directly the citizens to get benefits and they pay us per worker, per family or per farmer or per MSME. We also help micro businesses get access to government schemes and small businesses access to loans, government loans. The second is through our training model, where again large philanthropies say we have these 5,000 women part of SRLM or NGO partners who we want to get trained on government scheme delivery, and then we become training partners. We have a training platform. The third, which is a very small part today, is where we directly charge citizens, which is only 10% of our overhead. Less than 10 actually. Right now it's still single digit, close to 10, but still single digit, where we charge a very small fee to citizens who can pay or micro businesses who can pay. And it's usually like a fixed fee per unit that we charge B2B and B2C, and it's an outcome driven payment. So nothing gets paid for the effort. Nothing gets paid for the outcome in that sense. If you get 50,000 rupees, it's not like we'll take 5,000 rupees from that. It's an effort-based pricing that if you caste certificate takes more effort, so the price will be higher compared to an Aadhaar, compared to a pension program, and Ayushman will be priced differently. So the pricing is state-wise, effort-wise, platform-wise. It's a dynamic pricing and it varies from state to state. And government plus a very nominal fee is what we charge. Large part of our fee is paid by the employer, the corporate.
So with B2B and with corporates being the EU, obviously some states probably figure less than other states, right?
Yes.
Corporates are not in many of the UP, Bihar, you don't find. So what's the thought there?
Yeah, I think that's where we have started setting up 2-3 innovations in the last year. Yojana Kendra, Yojana Card. We set up our block level centers with NASCOM recently. We are launched our Yojana Card, which is our flagship citizen-facing card where citizens can directly pay a service at a discounted rate, which we are partnering with banks and other places. So we are innovating there because the advantage we have is we don't do anything else. So the disadvantage is we don't get access to other funds like livelihood and all, but the advantage is we can just focus and keep innovating in social security. So I think that, but yes, I mean, 10 states have 80% of our volume. So we would love to go deep in Bihar. We know the metrics just call out and say, put all resources in Bihar, but we have our hands tied in terms of resources. And we only want to get into a state when we can prove that we will not be burning money, but running it in a frugal way. So there are a lot of districts today that with all we will reach close to 3 million families by end of March. And I would say that we have a long way to go in terms of actually reaching those 100 districts which need us the most. Our presence there is still very small. Our presence is also a lot more in those districts and areas where corporates are. Huge need there as well, of course. But yes, if you would ask me, if I had all the resources in the world, I would go to those 100 districts where we are not there today. The Northeast, the Central India, the tribal parts. But I mean, that's the limitation.
Thanks, Anu, for that question. Aniket, I'm going to club a few questions, and this is on the theme of HNIs, and how do we use HNIs to, raise funds? And did Haqdarshak in its earlier days have HNI funding? And also, there are times when, how does one woo back a funder who might have funded you in the past, but has now drifted apart? How do you, manage your HNIs in terms of fundraising?
Also, just to add to that question, Aniket, there are some funders who fund like Bihar. They come from Bihar, they have a lot of money, they fund Bihar-centric projects. Have you ever thought of sort of reaching out to folks like that? Or it's just like you have so many things to do, so now it's one more thing to do to reach out to a Bihar-centric philanthropist? I'm just thinking aloud.
So to be very honest, we refrain. My experience of taking program money from philanthropists hasn't been great. And why I say that is because if you do not have a process, it becomes at the whims and fancies of that individual. Our HNIs and philanthropies are the ones who've given us initial angel money and grants saying build technology, build process. And I think I really would say that that's the real value of an HNI and philanthropy. The McKinsey Scott, the Rohini Nilikani kind of way of giving. No questions asked. You believe the entrepreneur, you believe the idea, and then trust the process. I feel that we have grown because all our partners are corporate partners. So while it's a huge struggle of process, it is ensured that nobody just leaves the project in the middle on both sides, and also we take it to some conclusion. The second thing is that it is not suddenly that and I will not take names, but we've had experiences with HNIs and large philanthropists in the country who would say, no, but I want you to do this. And our team has said, but the community doesn't want that. Why would we give this service just because you want? So I think that's the risk. Because of course, I'm from Himachal. If tomorrow I were an HNI, I would say, oh, I want to do these 3 things in Himachal. But 20 years down the line, so there will be somebody in Himachal who would say, boss, this is not the reality. When you were in Himachal, when you were in Bihar, the reality was very different. Today's youth's aspiration are very different, right? So I think the real use of HNI philanthropy is to give unrestricted, and I am a great believer in that, unrestricted small amounts of money, but unrestricted money to build process, build corpus, invest in technology, invest in such resources. And outcome program should be done with CSR, because it's in a way also tied well, right? Year on year, reporting is there, commitment is there. And to the other part of the question of how do we have got back, and I think there are 2 parts to that of a funder. One, there are funders you have to identify after a few conversations who's not coming back. So don't waste time. Your funder has said no, and they've just they just now believe they don't believe in the idea. You just have to take that call, right? You can have 5, whether you have 5 conversations or 10 conversations. If you have yourself done the work honestly and you've given it your all and you've shared everything with that donor, they still don't want to come in, is because they just they don't want to fund it. And I think we should be okay with it, because as long as in the sector they're giving it to someone else. The donors who still believe in you but for some reason are not giving, I think fundamentally in my experience the idea is that we've not been able to again share data properly. Either it's a data issue and there is a mistrust issue or integrity issue that their perception might have come up, or the second could be around your what we call internally at Haqdarshak, what we have developed is the client account management. 2 years back we developed a team under partnerships called CAM, client account management, which we mirrored kind of through what IT companies do. And we felt that it is what we call client success and client, just having no agenda conversations with clients, macro conversations with clients, keeping them interested in the problem. So they may not, because sometimes they may not want to keep funding the routine thing. They might want to also have a conversation with you to understand what is happening in the sector, because they also don't have very little window to understand what new things you want to do. So That has helped us get back the clients. A lot of our clients, which had, let's say, during COVID, suddenly shifted into funding healthcare or vaccination. But because we constantly kept, in fact, in certain cases, our CAM teams encouraged them and said, yes, this is important, funded right now. But because we had regularly kept in touch and we were keeping them abreast of, we are doing the Yojana card, the government is coming up with these schemes. A lot of them last year came back and said, oh, I want to do Ishram project with you. I want to do a Ayushman Bharat large project for construction workers with you. So I think in that kind of some of those investments in teams and processes does help.
Sure. Thanks, Aniket. I think we move on to our next question. Everyone's curious about this question. Somebody had to ask, and Hari did it. So, what was the rationale behind raising funds via Shark Tank? Was it only a funding exercise, or was it also a marketing exercise, or both?
So it was not at all a funding exercise, because I think we were lucky we have Acumen Fund, Beyond Capital, all impact funds on our cap table. And they have been very supportive of our work and impact. And luckily, we've also been able to sustainably run the business. We have not burnt money. So there was no as such need. We are raising money, but we have good funds. So, I mean, no disrespect to the funders at Shark Tank, but there are much more impact funders in the country who we have gone to already and raised funds. The idea was two things. One, marketing, publicity, because I feel like getting the idea of Haqdarshak, we believed in the team, was very important to let people know something like this exists. So at an organization level, we debated, and that's the reason in the episode, if you would see, that it was our Haqdarshika who demoed the platform, Jyoti. And she's been and in the show, it only is a 14-minute clip, but it was a 2.5-hour pitch inside. So she actually spoke for 45 minutes, and she's the one who got us the investment, because once they said who uses this, she said, I use it. I won 1 lakh rupees through this. So then you're getting the user there. So then, of course, the narrative changes. The second reason to do this was just for the sector, because I had, before even picking up that topic mid last year, when I got an invite from them to say somebody had nominated as one of our investors. And so a lot of people said, no, Shark Tank is not for you. Why are you going there? Impact. And I said, why not? If somebody has to go there and say, because we are doing the same work, we are doing actually the tougher work. Organizations in our space are working on waste management, on environment, on water, on agriculture, on social security, on healthcare, on education. And the toughest geographies, we are creating the level 0 ready for commercial organizations, right? If this sector doesn't keeps this segment together, who will banks lend to? Who will EdTech sell their products? So idea also was that to break that a little bit of taboo, that we have done. I little like less humbly, I would say, at Haqdarshak, we have time and again tried to break that. Our marketing strategy, our comm strategy. A lot of people used to tell us earlier that you should not, be so heavy on comms. We said we will share because it's authentic data. Why shouldn't we share, right? And similarly, a little bit of that approach was to go to Shark Tank. And the second, like I said, was pure getting the idea. And I think more than anything else, it has helped us attract talent in the last 3 months. Because a lot of people who wanted to do this from a lot of sectors have reached out and said, we want to work in this space, or we want to start something like this.
I think it's wonderful that you went, because I do think that we need to amplify the work that you do, but also the work that's happening in the sector. So, thank you for doing that.
I think that's all the time we have for today. So thank you so much, Aniket, for making it today and answering all our questions as candidly as you did. And thank you so much for sharing those insights.
Thank you, Aniket.
So much. Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Adil. And always a pleasure speaking with you, Anu. And great learning as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to also thank all our attendees, who took time out to attend this webinar. Just an appeal to apply to the ILSS fundraising program. We are now, recruiting for our 6th edition of the fundraising program. And we all work in this development sector and impact people's lives. I think our work really deserves the funding that we need. And I think this program will teach you how to ask for that funding in a very efficient manner. So please do check out this program on our website. Good night, everyone. Thank you.